Hello again. Our guest today is Kevin Compton, who is a partner in the venture capital firm Kleiner Perkins Caufield and Byers from the Silicon Valley. Welcome to Lipscomb, Kevin.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
We're delighted to have you. Other partners in your firm include former Vice President Al Gore, who happens to be one of our Nashville neighbors here, and former Secretary of State Colin Powell. So you have quite a prestigious group of partners. KPCB specializes in investments in the incubation stage and can count among its successful ventures such companies as Google, Amazon.com, Sun Microsystems, Intuit, AOL. The list goes on and on and on.
We've been very fortunate to back some really, really smart people.
Sounds like it. So tell me what the secret is. What do you look for when you make an investment?
You know, the truth is it is about the people. There's a lot of good ideas out there, and there's a lot of good technologies, but two things that really line up well, which is a movement, the adoption of microprocessors, the browser on the internet, like Netscape and everything that followed around that, optical communications, genomics, and understanding how the gene works. These major trends come along, and there's been 6 or 7 in the last 25 years, maybe 6 or 7 in that time. And when you catch one of those and you align that with a great team, the ideas are so abundant that you get a great team, catch the right wave, good things happen. One of the fun things to do is go back and look at the original presentation some entrepreneur brings you with what their company turns out to be. And I don't know who's laughing harder, the investors or the entrepreneur, but they typically were smart people, hardworking people, honest people who rode a wave and were early.
I used to say in my former career as an investment banker, the one thing you could absolutely count on is that the business plan would not work out the way it was predicted. It might be better, it might be worse, but it would not be what was predicted. But that's life.
Yeah, and that's correct. The only thing you know about the business plan is it's not right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So were you there the day Google walked in the door?
I was.
Tell me about that.
So we had somebody who we'd worked with, Andy Bechtolsheim, who we had backed at Sun, who's one of the founders of Sun, had found these guys at Stanford. Andy was working closely with them and said, you got to meet these guys and you got to see what's going on. And at that time, Yahoo was dominating search, and Microsoft was sticking its nose in it, and things like that. And Larry and Sergey came in, and you just knew they had it. And while their search was certainly creative, they had come up with some very innovative business models and ways to monetize the web. And you could just see they were great people with great ideas.
Yeah, how did you know that they had it? What told you that?
Well, you know, so there's 2 stories to that. One is we're brilliant investors and we always know. Then there's the truth, which is we look back and go, wow, we got that one right, didn't we? And, you know, first of all, they had created a lot of momentum very early on. They had a very clever idea, not just in how they were doing the search and how they were ranking things by who was looking at it and things, but in how they planned to monetize it. And you could just see the fire in their eyes, and that's really one of the things you look for.
So as long as we're going to be honest about this, let's talk about...
We were. I'm not sure we'll stay that way.
Let's talk about batting averages. What would a typical venture capital firm expect to see as a batting average?
So you may not like this answer, but again, I actually have no idea about venture stuff outside of our firm. I always told everybody, and my partners as well, let's spend all our time with the entrepreneurs and in the industry and in the universities, and less time with other venture firms figuring it out. I hear it's pretty low. For ours, it's pretty high for one reason. We really work hard on staying with the company, follow-on financing, sticking with it for many years. You know, there's not many Googles, that's for sure. And that list you read is some of the better ones we've done. But there's not many failures, just outright failures. There certainly are some, and you don't like that, but when you do early-stage ventures, that's what happens. And usually you got the team wrong. The idea was probably solid, but the team just couldn't execute.
How do you separate mentoring from micromanaging?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, you've got some good experience in this area because it's probably the most important difference there is, which is all of us, all my partners and I came from operating backgrounds. None of us were, came out of an investment or from a finance side. We all came from an operating side. And one of the things when I've brought in other partners or young associates, I've said, you now have to learn the difference between instructing and influencing.
when they worked for you, you instructed people what to do. And if you were good at it, good results happened. Now you have to influence people. And and everybody's a little different on how they take influence. Some of my entrepreneurs call twice a day, you know, especially in the early days, and say, here's what we're working on, here's what we're working on. Some of them never call. And yet you have equal responsibility for both those. And so it's your job to kind of read how the entrepreneur wants to work. Most of them listen because we have a track record, and I have really smart partners who have things that they can bring to the table. And then some of them, you know, want to do it their way and want to move on. And you knew you signed up for that when you invested, or else you have to, because they're in charge. It's their company.
Now, you mentioned a minute ago, Kevin, that usually when you made a mistake, it was because you picked the wrong people. So are you prepared to step in and replace management teams in order to salvage your investment?
So that's a really tough question. We do have to change management teams from time. In the private equity world, which I'm in the venture capital world, private equity world, that's common. In venture capital, it's not as common because you're really backing the entrepreneurs, you're backing the founders. What you hope to do is augment the management team, is bring in people around them, bring in you know, executives with seasoned experience who maybe don't want that super early stage risk or didn't have the insightful idea, but are good operators, good managers, good at hiring people, and you surround the entrepreneurs with that group. Sometimes you have to change them, and it's not fun, and it's certainly not what you go in thinking to do. I've got a current company I'm working on the board of right now who the founder says to me, next quarter we're going to get a new CEO. And I say, okay, I'm good if we do and good if we don't, because you're doing a good job. And then the next quarter we get down together and he goes, really, next quarter I'm going to get a boss, and I'm going to bring a boss in. And he's doing a great job. Someday I think he will bring in a seasoned operator, but right now he's learning and growing with the job, and as long as it's working, I'm with him.
Who drove the decision to bring in Eric Schmidt to augment the original management team at Google?
Larry and Sergey. I was not closely involved in that decision. My partner John Doerr was on the board, but from early on they wanted to bring in help to help them grow the business. They knew they had something special, and they wanted to make sure that they gave it they wanted to make sure their vision, their idea had every chance to succeed, and they thought doing that, bringing in Eric, was the right guy.
I don't think you've written your memoirs yet.
I have not.
So when you do, tell me the best story that you've saved for your memoirs.
Ooh, the best story I've saved for my memoirs. Believe it or not, there's a company now called Citrix, which is now a multi-billion-dollar company. But we 3 times in the early 90s wrote that company to zero, saying that, you know, we had put $1 million into it, and then we sit as partners and say, okay, what's that $1 million worth today? You know, when it's a public market, you know what it's worth. You have a number of shares, and you have a price on those shares, and you multiply the two, and that's what it's worth. When it's private, you don't have that kind of exact science.
A little harder.
We tried to be honest with each other every quarter, or certainly annually, and say what it's worth. And 3 times we said, you know, it's not worth anything. But let's put a little more money in because we really like the idea. Or sometimes we basically just said, look, we can't let this fail. We've backed these managers. They're really working hard. They've done everything they said they would do. Wrote it to zero 3 times, and I remember then they finally got traction in the early 90s, and then it just rose. And I remember watching the management team morph and grow and change. And actually the whole management team survived up until recently, growing the company from 0 in revenue over 3 years with 0 in revenue, 0 in revenue, and 0 in revenue to now, you know, $1.5 billion or $1.7 billion in revenue. And watching that company grow through that was really fun to watch.
You're in the middle of a region of the country that has spawned a lot of really interesting startups in recent years, particularly since the advent of the internet.
Yes.
There's a fabulous book out, maybe a year old, called Free, and it talks about free as a business model,
right,
which is a characteristic of many of the companies that have become residents of the Silicon Valley. Tell me about the free business model. How do companies make money when they give away their products?
Well, so that's a great question, and I wish every company did it that way. It's harder to do it when you have hard goods, when you have a cost of goods, and you want to give away this cup and say, look, you know. But when you have software where your cost of goods is only your engineering costs, you can do that. And how you do that is you say, look, use it, and if you like it and it adds value to your business, pay us for it. Not everyone does. Most do. And what it is you want to get massive adoption. I think the guy that
at least the one I credit with in creating this model, was John McAfee from McAfee Software. And John put virus protection software out on the internet free and said, download it. And if we stop viruses from hitting your computer, send me in a few bucks. I mean, that's how it was.
And it worked.
And it worked. And people sent him in a few $100 million.
Yeah.
And then people sent him in a lot more. And large corporations, you know, now, actually, a company I'm on the board of recently, I was in New York this morning. And a large investment bank came to me and said, Kevin, we now have 30,000 copies of this software running. We have to pay the company. And I said, I bet they'll take your money. They'll figure it out.
Sure.
And they're just figuring out the right deal. And so I think the reason I love the model is it forces the company to add value. And if they're adding value and creating value for the customers will pay them for it.
Now, we've all read a lot about Facebook in the last few months. Of course, a famous movie was made that documented the history of Facebook. Here's another example of a company that's free. It doesn't cost anything to participate in Facebook. Tell me how they plan to make money. What's the business model?
Well, they're monetizing it now by basically advertisers. So people sponsor contests, people sponsor pages, people run banner ads. In fact, I think they just became #2 in banner ads. And so that's good. You know, if you're looking at a site or you're writing a story about the next car you want to buy, Ford and General Motors and Mercedes, and all want to know that. And so they'd like to put an ad up there saying that. So there's a great fit with that. Think of it as kind of the Yellow Pages meets One Ads meets 2011. So it's not a new business model from that point of view. It's a new business model and how they're doing it there. And while it is free that you don't pay a fee, you bought the computer, you paid the internet connection, you contributed content, you got your friends on there. What's that worth to Facebook?
Sure, lots.
A lot.
We're also talking in our marketing classes here at Lipscomb about the changes that social media has brought to marketing. Today there's a movement, a fabulous movement as a matter of fact, toward peer-to-peer recommendations as opposed to top-down advertising. Tell me about your thoughts regarding that.
Big fan of it. I think one of the best examples is if you have an iPhone or an Android phone and you go to the app stores now and you say, you know, I think I want to use this app that tracks weight loss or tracks, you know, something, and you read the reviews. And these reviews are, you know, by people who use the application, and you learn a lot from them and say don't buy it or do buy it, or really, I love that model. Now, it really helps if you've heard of the app or heard of the company or something like that. If Microsoft puts an app up, maybe you've heard of Microsoft. They spent, you know, millions and millions of dollars over the years creating a brand and creating value in that brand. So then all of a sudden you have a brand you've heard of on an application you think you need and people endorsing it. That's a buy signal every time.
Sure, sure. Kevin, we've just come through a very difficult period of time in the U.S. economy. Lots of people are talking about the great hope of the U.S. economy is to jumpstart job creation, and it's early stage companies that typically create the most jobs. Are there thoughts you have about what we may be doing right or perhaps what we may be doing wrong in the U.S. economy today?
Well, I'm not sure we're counting jobs right, and I've not done enough homework to really give a definitive answer on this, but I know that typically it's been a polling system and also a unemployment check, and there's a lot of people out there today that have not been on any corporate you know, ledger ever. They've started their own company, they've got 7 people working with them, and they're doing their own thing. I think that is where a lot of the job creation will come from, and I'm not sure we're counting them at all. Let me tell you right now, the incoming business plans, it ebbs and flows in my business. I always tell people my job is kind of as busy as I can possibly allow myself to be, 24/7. It never changes over the years. You really don't feel economic cycles because during the up times you're investing in things, during down times you're building those things, and during up times, you know, it's crazy. Sure. And right now it's crazy. The incoming of clever ideas, taking advantage of this meeting of mobile meets social, meets the web, meets fully connected, meets, you know, location independence is really high. When we hire engineers now, we almost never ask them where they live. We ask them where do you want to work. And we have companies who have 25 employees and they may represent 7 or 8 locations.
Now, we've just come back from India. We're about to take MBA students to India for our first trip there. Each spring we take MBA students to China. Really interesting to see what's going on in China and India, and we can talk more about that in just a moment. But I'd like to come back to your comment there about the flow of business plans. Are you optimistic about the future of America?
I am very optimistic. I still think when you innovate and work hard, leadership is yours to have. And we are innovating, and lots of really smart people are working very hard. Look at how GM's been remade, you know, and it hasn't been remade by just throwing everybody out in the street and closing plants. There was certainly some rationalization that needed to happen, but the employees just got the largest profit-sharing checks they've received in the history of the company.
Sure.
So I'm very optimistic. We can build cars, we can build software, we can build anything. It's just a matter of rationalizing it and doing it right.
We were very impressed in India to see the level of entrepreneurism that's taking place in that country. I think there's an Indian Venture Capital Association that's been formed.
There is. Same
thing in China. China, of course, has a more centralized, planned economy. India's a little bit more rough and tumble. Any comments about either China or India and which you think might ultimately end up as the winner in the competition they're engaged in?
I don't think there will be a ranking. There probably will be because people like to rank first, second, third. I think the truth is that the people are the winners now, that they are feeling free to innovate, feeling free to start companies, feeling free to take risk. For many years, the equivalent of the Secretary of Commerce, whatever the title was from some country, would come to us at Kleiner and say, can we meet with you? We want to start a Silicon Valley in Ireland, England, India. Everywhere over the years have come to see us. And I would always ask them a few questions we won't take time to do today that all have to do with risk tolerance and how you're viewed by your family if you take these risks. And up until recently, they all failed the test. No, we wouldn't allow someone in our family to take that kind of test, or we certainly wouldn't be proud of them if they did.
Yeah.
And I said, in Silicon Valley, the brother-in-law you never really liked, that you never really spoke to you go to a startup, and even if it doesn't work, he goes, good. Cool, very cool. I'm proud of you.
Yeah.
Because that's the culture. And now I see that culture spreading in China and spreading in India, and that's what it takes. So the answer is we're all going to be the winners, and great products are going to emerge because of that.
Are you looking for investments in China or India?
Yes.
Do you have offices in China or
We
India?
have fund affiliations in all places.
Okay.
So it's in venture, you don't really, offices are kind of not the right model.
Okay. Let me come back to my question about the state of play in the U.S. today. If President Obama called you and said, Kevin, I need you at the White House tomorrow, give me your best advice, what would that advice be?
Remove a lot of the regulation that is so broadly written that it basically stifles everyone. Today, I've gotten off most public boards. In fact, right now I'm currently on no public boards, and there was a time when I was on a dozen public boards, because the board meetings, all we did is go in and talk about governance and things like that, instead of how do we build a company, and how do we grow that company, and how do we give better service to our customers, and how do we make better products at better prices, and how do we take them internationally, and all those kind of things. And we moved to, all right, are we doing this, are we doing this, and are we doing this? Certainly some of it was needed, especially in the large-scale corporate environments. But a lot of it wasn't needed and certainly didn't apply to small companies.
We live in Nashville, Tennessee, and Nashville is a cluster for healthcare, much like the Silicon Valley is a cluster for technology and the internet. Has your firm invested in healthcare ventures, and would you invest in healthcare ventures here in Nashville?
Kleiner does have a practice in biotech. One of our first investments in the whole history of the firm was Genentech. Done several large companies since then. So yes, we do have a medical practice both for devices and for what we call basically personalized health or personalized medicine.
What's the future of healthcare in this country?
Much more personal, much less institutional, much more because you have a certain disease that they used to characterize by maybe where it was and what organ it was in or something like that. That wasn't the right characteristic. Certainly it's in that organ, but it may behave way different for you and it may look like something else. And so understanding how that disease is manifesting itself inside you is way more important than where it's located. And that's how the next generation of treatment is going to come.
I'm fascinated by the fact that I can go to China or India and take my ATM card from my billfold and get $500 out of an ATM machine. But if I try to check into a hospital in the United States, I have to remember my entire medical history. I have to remember any prescriptions I'm on. never mind the fact that I was just in a car wreck and I may be unconscious. So why can't we figure that out? And have you seen a business plan that figures that out?
So I've seen, in all honesty, I've seen dozens of business plans that figure it out, and I've seen just huge resistance from the other side. And some of the resistance is completely illogical, and some of it's very logical. Your right to privacy, people find out if you have a disease, they think you're going to be judged that you've got that disease and therefore be biased against work situations or school situations or personal situations. And so that's fair, especially since we don't understand most diseases very well and someone thinks that you have something that it's, I always tell people broken legs are not contagious, but we're all susceptible to them. So I think there's a big issue there. The system has had a tremendous trouble of opening up like you can an ATM and sharing information across all the different banking organizations. Hospitals are just slow to do that, not because they don't want your information, it's because they don't want to give your information to anybody else. And that's got to get fixed. I tell you, if you talk to anybody under 30 who's got a Facebook account and they tell them, you'd like to have your medical information on a card that goes anywhere, they go, yeah, or I'll put it on my Facebook web.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd be happy to share it with anybody just so I don't have to remember it every time I go to the doctor.
And by the way, that culture is changing. That culture is changing. I actually think it's a cultural change that's going to happen. It's not a technology issue, and because of your ATM example, and it is changing now.
Well, if you look at the demographics of the future of America, we have to fix that problem as well as other problems related to healthcare because we're facing a cataclysm just in the very near future. 10,000 people a day turning 65 for the next 20 years in this country. And so we live in a very interesting city here in Nashville because of the importance we have to that problem and that challenge.
Yeah, it's not a technology issue. It's a policies, procedure, and cultural issue. The technology's ready, the culture is getting ready, everything else will get knocked down when those two align.
Sure. Well, we just have a few more minutes, and I'm very fascinated by your 5 rules. When I did my research on your visit today, I discovered your 5 rules. Will you tell us about what that's all about?
Sure. You're good at your homework. You obviously use Google, and we want to thank you for that.
It's called due diligence.
Due diligence, that's right. So yeah, there are 5 rules that I talk about, and I give a little different spin on them and where we're at. But the first rule, no matter where I'm at, speaks to the golden rule in Matthew, and it is treat people the way you want to be treated. And that's both a personal stance, it's a business stance, it's a faith-based stance for me personally. But I'll tell you, it's amazing how it changes everything when you're working with an entrepreneur and you say, right now I'd like to take that guy and string him up. But I wouldn't like to be strung up if I'd made that mistake. So I'm going to go down and sit down and talk with him and explain to him why that was And by the way, I hope people treat me that same way. So that dual road golden rule is number one by far. Number 2, I have this thing that says make an effort. It's amazing, what happens when you just make an effort. If you get focused on the right thing and are working and you're a smart person and an honest person and you make an effort, usually good things happen. The third one is have a sense of urgency. I always tell all of our entrepreneurs, one of the first things I try to help them on, because they call me usually 60 days into it and go, time management is a problem, what do I do? And I'll say, well, if you're making a list of things you want to do, you're in trouble. Because all you've done is make a list. If you take your list and make that list on your calendar, then not only do you know you want to do it, you have time allocated to do it. So I want to be here meeting with you, it's on the calendar, therefore that's what got the priority. So getting your time, having a sense of urgency, and then prioritizing things right, and getting them on the calendar, and then sticking with it.
Sure.
So time management is a huge problem in the technology world for entrepreneurs. Number 4, as you can imagine, being at Kleiner Perkins for all these years, think big. Really think big. If it can be a microprocessor, in a computer, why can't a microprocessor be in everything? We're running out of addresses for internet addresses, because 4.3 billion weren't enough.
Who would have thought it?
Exactly, and the next one is, I think it's 16 trillion is the new numbering scheme, if I have it right. It's a number that doesn't matter right now, although someone in the future is going to be sitting down in the studio going, can you believe they thought that was enough? So think big, think big. And then the last one is think small, which is remember people are people, remember they have birthdays, remember they have kids in school, remember they have lots of issues. And remembering those little things make a huge difference.
I tell all of our entrepreneurs, especially when their company's small, with today's modern calendaring systems, if you don't know everybody's birthday in your company and can't remember to say, swing by and say hi, shame on you. It's not hard.
It's not hard.
You just put it in their contact and it shows up on your calendar.
Yeah.
Not that that one's that important, but it sets the tone of thinking small, remembering little things.
Sure, sure. Now, one of my mentors in the investment banking business taught me that when I did due diligence, the last question I should ask is, what should I have asked you if I'd only known to ask you? So let me close with that question, Kevin. What should I have asked you that I didn't know to ask you about?
You know, if I can put it in the context of this great university, often, and I wouldn't be surprised if we got asked this later today, the number one question, or the question I get from students and from people is say, how do you balance your faith with just the rough and tumble, unethical world of business? And I tell them that in 30 years of business, I've never, ever felt any conflict. You mean to tell me, well, let's cook the books. Well, no, don't cook the books because it's illegal or immoral and you're a Christian. No, don't cook the books because it's a dumb thing to do. Mm-hmm. How can you run your business if you're cooking the books? If you don't even know what the numbers are, how can you do it? Let's cheat our customers and let's take $1 here. No, don't because you're a Christian. No, don't because it's a dumb thing to do, because pretty soon the customers are going to quit coming.
Sure.
I've never ever, to be honest with you, found a conflict between being a Christian and being a business person.
That's really encouraging for you to say, particularly to our students, because as a faith-based institution, we place a great deal of importance not only on instilling academic excellence, but also in challenging our students to develop a high code of conduct and moral integrity. So I appreciate your encouraging words on that, and particularly appreciate you being at Lipscomb today. Thank you so much.
Well, it's been great to be here. Thank you.
Well, we're honored to have you. Thanks. Please come back again.
I'd like that.
Our guest today has been Kevin Compton, who's a partner at Kleiner Perkins Caufield and Byers in the Silicon Valley. We're honored to have Kevin, and we thank you for being here.
Thank you.